At some point, we're going to have to apologize to James Franklin.
You are Locked On College Football with Spencer McLaughlin, your daily podcast on all things college football. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On College Football. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view every day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day and your daily source to stay up to date with the biggest stories in this, the greatest sport on planet Earth. This episode brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Jaden Rashada is in the transfer portal again. Oh boy, that's a head drop and a sigh sort of moment there. And Georgia is doing what they need to do. But James Franklin is, in some people's view, the king of doing what he needs to do, or really what he should do in college football. The big game narrative around James Franklin, I believe, while he is at Penn State, is going to be broken eventually. I don't know if that's going to be now. I don't know if that's even already happened. I just know that at some point, he's going to win a game, and everyone that says he'll never do X will have to admit, oh, okay, well, he did X, and I didn't think that he could. Here's a question I have, and I'm legitimately wondering from all of you out there. When is that point? Does he have to win the national championship? Does he have to beat Notre Dame? Because he has consistently, in the last couple of years, failed to beat the best teams in the Big Ten. Big Ten championship game against Oregon, loss. Ohio State at home, loss. Michigan a year ago, loss. He's not getting blown out in those games. He's not getting he's not having done to his team what Dan Lanning just had done to his team in the Rose Bowl. He's barely losing those games. So then he goes into a home game in the first round and blasts the ACC runners-up into oblivion, 38-10. And everyone just kind of shrugs their shoulders. Like, this guy never gets any credit for the games that he does win because he has set such a high bar, such an incredibly high bar, to where if he loses a game that you feel he should lose, it would be really big news. Do you know how many coaches in college football lose games they shouldn't lose? I understand where the James Franklin critics are coming from. Because on the one hand, he hasn't broken through with a signature win. I mean, sure, he just won another playoff game by at least 17 points. Well, it was Boise State. I get the sense that even if James Franklin beats Notre Dame, he's going to have the same sort of narrative spun about him in the media sphere. Well, he hasn't beaten this team, hasn't beaten that team. He could go to the national championship game, and you would still have people out there doubting that he can have his team ready in a big game just because he hasn't won as many as you would like him to. Well, when I look at what James Franklin has done at Penn State, he has been wildly successful. He consistently pushes for double-digit win seasons. He has done that for a decade at this point, over a decade. And he is currently one of the Final Four teams in all of college football. I don't care that much how he got there, how easy you perceive his path to have been. To say that Penn State is light years away from winning what you'd consider the big one, they're a tight point spread. There is a tight spread against Notre Dame this week. You know why? Because it's probably going to be a close competitive game. And Marcus Freeman looks like a pretty good coach. But the James Franklin-Marcus Freeman dichotomy in this matchup is the classic example of how impatient college football fans are, which I understand. You want your team, Notre Dame's favored by 1.5 points, by the way. You want your team to be good. You want them to be good now. You want to get to this level here. And everyone thinks it takes so little time when it doesn't. Jim Harbaugh was hired at Michigan in 2015. Dabo Swinney was hired as the head coach at Clemson in 2009. Dabo's first national championship came in the 2016 college football season. Jim Harbaugh's came in 2023. But you look at the run that James Franklin has had, just because he hasn't, won a national championship? He's won a Rose Bowl, by the way. He's won 2 playoff games, but we all want to just shrug that off. When Marcus Freeman first got to Notre Dame, which was just a few seasons ago after Brian Kelly departed for LSU, there were some disastrous outcomes. I mean, full throat. This season, there was another disastrous outcome. Foot to the floor, feet to the fire, absolutely horrible. Northern Illinois, unacceptable. They lost to Marshall. They lost to a terrible Stanford team. They've had some really, really bad moments. And what we tend to want in some spaces for college football, quarterbacks in particular, growth and progression, we don't seem to allow consistently for head coaches. Now, yes, James Franklin has been there for a very long time. But for the longest time, the conversation around him was, well, if they had an expanded playoff, no one would benefit more than Penn State. And once that opportunity arose, who was ready to walk into the door of the 12-team playoff? Penn State. Who was ready on back-to-back game days? Penn State. If you're going to levy criticism at James Franklin, I hope you have the same thoughts on Steve Sarkisian at Texas. And I'm not down on Sark, by the way, who didn't figure it out immediately at Texas. At Texas. And I know Franklin has been at Penn State a lot longer than Steve Sarkisian has been at Texas. But we're also in a different era of college football where you build rosters in a significantly different way than you did when Franklin first took over. Does it feel like Penn State is behind the times? Does it feel like James Franklin's stuck in his ways? Does it feel like James Franklin is not able to get the most out of his players? In a couple of select games, sure. But for the most part, James Franklin doing what he should do, or what we perceive him to be you should do this. You should win this game. Look around college football. How many games are lost by teams that shouldn't lose? Alabama lost to Vanderbilt. Ole Miss lost to Kentucky. Just to name a couple of games that shouldn't have been lost, that shouldn't have been close. But we don't give James Franklin any credit for that. You hold him to a standard. By the way, I consider the Rose Bowl a fairly significant game, even though it wasn't a playoff game when he won it. But James Franklin's also won two of those playoff games. But, let's just put all of that aside right now. Is your standard for this guy can coach, or I believe this guy can do it, he has to win the national championship, he has to get to that game? Because if so, I think that's far too high a standard. There are two active head coaches that have won national championships. Dabo Swinney, Kirby Smart. Is every other coach in college football a failure every time he doesn't win a national championship? I think James Franklin is a great coach, and he takes a lot of flack. And I just wonder. I don't really have a sense. You have to tell me. That's how this feedback mechanism works. You tell me, if he beats Notre Dame, does that go feather in his cap as a big game win? Or, well, it's Notre Dame and they lost to NIU? Because those dots can get connected so very easily that I can see it all transpiring now, but I hope it doesn't. Because I think he's a really good coach. I think Penn State is playing really good football. Really good football. They have played two games, not particularly close. Many of you might be thinking Texas can go win the national championship. They should have lost to Arizona State. They didn't. Give them credit for that. Whatever you think of that particular game, they found a way to win. Penn State hasn't put themselves in that situation where it comes down to a call or a play. They've just gone out and won so far. So I think Penn State Notre Dame will be a great matchup. But I'm just wondering. And for James Franklin's sake, I am hoping that if he wins this game, people can shake that, well, James Franklin can't beat good teams. Really? I've seen him win a lot of football games. No, he can't beat Ohio State all the time. Oregon just had some problems with Ohio State. But if that's the standard you're holding him to, okay, you're never going to be satisfied. Fine. You can have that. I think James Franklin's really good. And I think Penn State Notre Dame should be a phenomenal football game. Let me know your thoughts in the YouTube comments or hit me up on Twitter at McLaughlin CFB. That be the handle. So Jaden Rashada is in the transfer portal. Do you remember this name? You should. You should. And I'll tell you why. First, I want to tell you about Game Time. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, whether you win or lose. The FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, same-game parlays, and so much more. Notre Dame minus 1.5. I'm intrigued. Basically a pick 'em, but not entirely a pick 'em. Ohio State minus 5.5. Oof, that's a big number. That's a big, big number. Do you think they're ridiculous? Well, by all means, you go bet that over at FanDuel. FanDuel.com. That's where you go to join today and get started with $200 in bonus bets at FanDuel.com. FanDuel.com, that's the place to go. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. So one of the wildest recruitments for a college football quarterback is still ongoing, somehow, some way. Jaden Rashada is in the transfer portal, and this is not a great thing for college football. This situation, I'm not placing all the blame at Rashada's feet here. I am saying that all of this is able to transpire in essentially a 2-year span, just over 2 years, is emblematic, representative of how messed up college football is in several ways. Now, are solutions on the horizon? I've seen no indication of that. There is no commissioner. Nick Saban sounds great in theory. Who's authorizing that? The Big Ten or the SEC? Because the fundamental problem that the idea of a college football commissioner faces is that the power brokers in college football have to agree to it. And if there is one person who's overseeing everyone underneath, those people underneath who appoint that person now have less power because they are not the premier decision makers. It would be just kind of one decision maker. I'm sure there'd be a council and a committee or a board or what have you. But Jaden Rashada was once upon a time committed to Miami. This was a 5-star quarterback coming out of high school. And then he flipped to Florida at the last moment. This is a 2023 quarterback recruit. He was wanted by all sorts of colleges all across the country. Remember, this kid is not even 20 years old yet. He might be around 20 years old. He's not even 21, not old enough to drink. And he has gone through all of these things already because of the college football world that has been created for him. In January 2023, he decommits from Florida after he had signed a national letter of intent. In February 2023, he commits and signs with Arizona State. He plays in a handful of games. He gets beat out by Sam Leavitt for the starting job. He enters the transfer portal. He goes to Georgia, and now he has re-entered the transfer portal. So I don't bring this up to say that he's someone who, X team should go grab and he could be the starter. He's got plenty of talent, but I have no idea where this kid's head is at. I really legitimately hope that he is able to find a situation. I don't care if it's at the Power 4, the Group of 5, or the FCS ranks. I hope he finds a situation that just gives him some stability. This craziness and madness is not good for the sport, and it is not good for the kids that are playing college football. Let's start with the sport itself and the people that make the sport worthwhile, and that's the fans. Remember that time during COVID when there were no fans in stadiums or reduced capacity? Yeah, I remember that. It stunk. And one of the greatest moments that I remember as a college football fan is when we were finally able to get fans safely back into stadiums, and Wisconsin did jump around. I'm not a Wisconsin Badger fan, but watching that happen for the first time in several years was a beautiful thing to watch. So when I think about what's better for college football, I'm thinking about the fans, because far too many people in this space or at levels far higher than mine are not thinking about the fans. So for college football fans, it is becoming increasingly more difficult to root for your team, not on Saturdays, but during the off season. And remember, the season's just about over, by the way, which, that's very sad. But the season is end of August to now middle towards end of January. But for most people, it ends sometime in December. Then you have this big, long off season where, of course, you're going to keep up with your team. What do you think I talk about on Locked On College Football all year round? But when you have situations like this, where a kid is bouncing around from place to place, This is just a high profile example, but there are several others out there. It becomes hard to be a fan because a lot of college football fans, a lot of people that listen to or watch this show, I know are middle-aged folks who grew up in a time where when you committed to play for a school, you committed and you stayed committed to play for that school. So the mercenary approach to college athletics is harder for the fans. It's one of the reasons that college football actually has had an advantage over college basketball. College basketball introduced the one and done, and that's the worst thing that college basketball could have done. That's, player empowerment of sorts. And sure, maybe it's better to have kids for 1 year rather than 0 years, but is it? Because attachments are formed between fans and players, sometimes instantaneously, but mostly over the course of a career. And you get a familiarity with a kid. And then when he actually walks on senior day, it means something. Rather than this kid's walking on senior day, he showed up to our program earlier this year, and yeah, we appreciate his efforts, but I don't really, know this guy. Okay? The connection is different because it doesn't feel like the people who are making the sport, the players, are as committed to the school as the fans are. So when that's a one-way avenue, that's a frustrating thing for a lot of fans. Now, television numbers are incredibly strong. So college football, I'm not saying is dying. I'm still saying it can become better. So Rashada's career trajectory here is just one example of many where fans just throw up their hands and go, what are we doing here? Do you actually care about the sport, or do you care about what the sport can do for you? And fair or not, that's the question reaction that a lot of fans have. I can't blame them for going there when kids are doing this sort of stuff all the time. Ashton Jeanty is kind of a one-off. In today's world, it's surprising when a kid plays in a bowl game, or it's surprising when someone like Jeanty doesn't jump to the Power 4 ranks and stays loyal to the school that gave him an opportunity and is okay with whatever NIL resources exist there. Because I guarantee you, Ashton Jeanty had some big-time offers to go to the Power 4 ranks. Could have made a lot more money. Stayed with Boise State. I can appreciate that. I understand why kids bounce around a lot, but I don't think that it's actually a healthy dynamic between the fans and the teams. I think you create a level of resentment amongst fans to some extent. So that's the first side of it. The second side of it is I don't think this is great for the kids. And we should remember, these are kids. They get compared to adults all of the time who are in the coaching profession that can move around at will. And I am not against in any way, shape, or form the idea that you can transfer if your coach leaves, because that's something that you can't always anticipate. And I'm not against the portal per se, but thinking about the concept of, hey, if you're a non-graduate student, maybe you get one transfer where you're immediately eligible. I don't think that's the worst thing in the world, because believe it or not, this is going to sound very old-fashioned, perhaps even strange, coming from someone who is as young as me. I think college should be about learning life lessons and also maturing and growing. But going out there and just trying to find what is best for you and not being willing to sink your teeth into a tough situation and make the most of it, I don't think is accomplishing one of the fundamental goals of college football. And that's give kids an opportunity to better themselves. You are teaching them to look out for themselves and to just take the easiest route that they can possibly find. So this whole mess, I have no idea where he's going to end up. Absolutely, positively no idea. I hope it's a situation where he can settle in and go to succeed. I'm not rooting against the kid. My point is railing against the entire sport in general. The NIL was rolled out with little to no guardrails. The NCAA has lost the thread on governing college football. Schools have too much control over their own schedules. The conferences were able to realign, which we've all just accepted as, oh, okay, yeah, that's great and fine, when it's actually creating a lot more problems than it is solving. And this is the world that we've got. So you have all of these issues all across the sport. The calendar, scheduling, just go down the list. They're all over the place. And people like me will come on a show like this and say, this is a problem, needs to be fixed. I don't know how it gets fixed. I would love to be optimistic because if you haven't figured out, I love this sport and I want what is best for it. But where you create a culture in which he wants to go from this school to that school, but now he's leaving this school and suing that NIL collective over there because they promised him a bunch of money and he's not going to get, that's not constructive for anybody. Not helpful, not good. Please, someone figure it out. I don't know who. It probably comes down to the conference commissioners. Do I have a lot of faith that they can fix it? No, I really don't. They've helped create a lot of the problems that we currently have today. The Pac-12, RIP, died because of the actions of those individuals. So I don't have that much hope. But you know what? I don't have zero hope because there are a lot of people that care about this sport, and I'm hoping that the popularity of college football drives action to move it in the right direction. Let's keep our fingers crossed. End of rant. Crazy career. Crazy career. Commits to Miami, flips to Florida, gets out of the national letter of intent, goes to Arizona State, plays in a few games, transfers to Georgia. He's not going to be the starter. Oh my gosh. Who is going to be the starter at Georgia? I can't say that for certain right now. I can say for certain that they have made a really good addition. First, though, we're going to talk about game time. Attending the new 12-team college football playoff is an incredible experience and one that brings a lot of fans together. And if you want to go to either of the 3 remaining playoff games that exist in this college football season, it's over so quickly. Don't miss your chance, and Game Time's a place to do it. They have Game Time picks, which makes getting tickets for events even easier. It filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. I have personal experience with Game Time, and let me tell you, it is incredibly easy to use. I'm not as technologically savvy as you would think. Really, I use this stuff every day. I'm barely competent enough to bring you this show. I appreciate you being here, and I appreciate Game Time as well. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE. That's LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. So Zachariah and Zion Branch were at USC. Now they're going to Georgia. Now both of these guys were pretty highly touted recruits coming out of high school. And Zion Branch could be a good player. You go to a staff like Kirby Smart. I think that, or the one that Kirby Smart has, I should say, he is not the staff himself like Palpatine is the Senate, but he kind of is. So you go to that situation, you can do all sorts of stuff. Zachariah Branch is the real home run addition here for the Bulldogs. If you watch Georgia, here's the amazing thing. If you watched Georgia in their college football playoff quarterfinal against Notre Dame, you would have a great snapshot of what their entire season was. You look around and you go, boy, those guys look big and they look fast, and I don't think this defense is really that bad. I think they're pretty darn good on that side of the ball. Boy, the quarterback looks like he can throw it a little bit at times. Who's he throwing to? Those guys can't catch. It was bizarre. And it turns out, though Georgia attempted to reload in various ways, it did not work out this year. To replace Brock Bowers and Ladd McConkey, both of whom are starring in the NFL, Bowers individually, McConkey is the only competent receiver that Justin Herbert has on the Chargers. Replacing those guys wasn't as easy as it should have been. This is not a Georgia program that has suddenly just nosedived in recruiting. This is a program that recruits everything, everywhere, all at once, right? I think that was a movie. And I didn't see it, but I heard about it. I think it was good, but I, again, haven't seen it, so I'm not going to speak to it. But if I haven't seen or heard of it, it's probably about to win the Golden Globe for Best Picture or something like that. Oscars? I don't know. All gets confused. Anyway, Zachariah Branch is a Golden Globe caliber addition here in the transfer portal. So this is a strange thing to say. Strange, but this is the reality. USC was not capable under Lincoln Riley of maximizing the full potential of a former 5-star wide receiver. I know, it's weird. This is not a normal thing to be able to say. If you'd made that statement in college football just 2 years ago, everyone would have looked at you sideways and said, what are you talking about? That couldn't happen. The curious thing, though, is I think that Branch's transfer is either a reflection of how strong the culture is in Georgia, in addition to their NIL collective. I don't know if it's that as much as it is an indictment on what Lincoln Riley has at USC. Because it's not as if Branch, they didn't have the team success they were hoping for this season. They ended up going 7-6 after, a 2-0 season against the SEC. They start with a win in Las Vegas against LSU. They end with a win in Las Vegas against Texas A&M. It was a fantastic football game. But Branch came in as one of the most highly regarded recruits of the Lincoln Riley era in Los Angeles. And in his true freshman season, he had 31 catches, 320 yards, and 2 touchdowns. And you kind of felt, there's another gear in there. And then this season, he takes a step forward. And he goes for 47 catches, 503 yards, and just 1 touchdown. But they had other big body targets, guys like Jacoby Lane, to throw the ball to down in the red area. Now, he also has a punt return and a kick return touchdown in his career and has been a dynamic return guy from the moment he set foot on campus. So why would he go from an offensive mind like Lincoln Riley down to Athens, where Mike Bobo seems like he's a capable offensive coordinator, but you can't say that he's, as regarded as Lincoln Riley's name is necessarily? Why would Zachariah Branch make that jump? I think it's twofold. Factor number one, they might be bringing him in to be the number 1 wide receiver. I'm not so certain that if Branch had been in Georgia's receiver room this year, he wouldn't have been the number 1 guy. Now, he's not a big body type, but he is at his peak an even twitchier and better version of Ladd McConkey, who is a really good football player. But McConkey is a guy that gives you some Hunter Renfrow vibes. I look at Zachariah Branch, and I see someone who's got even more explosiveness to him. And McConkey was certainly a downfield threat for Georgia. But what I like fundamentally about this, something I like about all moves of this particular nature, Georgia didn't sit on their hands and say, well, we'll just try it again next year. We'll coach the guys up and no, you have a weakness, go attack it. Go out there and find a way, whatever that way is, recruiting a high school kid, because true freshman receivers are capable of coming in and shining right away. Jeremiah Smith, Ryan Williams, Cam Coleman, DeCorian Moore's coming in next year to Oregon. I mean, these guys are stepping onto the football field at the collegiate level, and they're ready to play right here, right now. And Branch looked like he was kind of that guy. He's a little bit smaller. He's not a big, Jeremiah Smith is a 6'3", 220. Cam Coleman's a big body sort of guy. Ryan Williams is, a little bit more of a perimeter receiver than Zachariah Branch. But as of now, I look at the weapons that Georgia has. I don't see one that has a ceiling the way that Zachariah Branch does. And I don't know who's going to be playing quarterback, but I just know that Kirby Smart and Mike Bobo saw what you and I saw and everybody else saw throughout the year. Not good enough at receiver. I mean, just some mind-numbingly bad drops. It wasn't a one-time thing or, boy, this happened the last couple weeks. It was all season. It was all season. And though I do feel that Georgia had a better chance against Notre Dame if Carson Beck plays, I don't think that Carson Beck wins them that football game. Because the other aspect of Georgia that is strange to say, I have no qualms with the defense, but there was inconsistent production from the quarterback position, number one. But number two, that offensive line did not live up to the billing, did not live up to some of the recruiting rankings of guys up front or some of the preseason accolades that they perhaps had. Georgia was not a dominant team in the trenches. They couldn't run the football all season long. And their offensive line was giving up far too many pressures against Notre Dame. I know that's a good front, but that didn't used to matter when Georgia was in its heyday just a couple of seasons ago. So I don't know that this will be the last move, the last high-profile move, rather, that Georgia goes out and makes in the transfer portal, but it is certainly one that catches my eye, and I go, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. So why would Branch leave USC? Because he can go to Georgia and be the number one guy. And the second reason, I alluded to it earlier, I think he looks around at what's going on in Los Angeles, and I don't know how badly the coaching staff wanted to keep him or anybody there from this year's team that fell way short of my own expectations and many others' expectations as well, especially after that season opening win against USC. They lost to Maryland. They lost to Minnesota this year. They blew a 14-point home lead against Penn State in a win that could have, kind of salvaged their season. They weren't able to sustain 4 quarters of quality play. I think Branch looked at that and said, I need a fresh start. Yeah, there's growth from year 1 to year 2, but this is a guy who can be a 1,000-yard receiver. That's the sort of talent profile that he has. Now the question becomes, who's throwing him the football? Is it Gunnar Stockton? I mean, it could be. You tell me, Georgia fans. I watch Gunnar Stockton and think, man, it looked pretty good. I didn't watch that game against Notre Dame when Georgia's season came to an end. I wasn't watching it going, quarterback's problem. Boy, they're really missing Carson Beck. Sure, there are a couple times where you miss Carson Beck, but Stockton could move. I saw him hit deep shots. I saw him make some good reads, and I saw some areas for growth. Kind of looks like he could be a starting quarterback next year. And by the way, Georgia won back-to-back national championships with Stetson Bennett. Stetson Bennett, a really good college football player, but nothing overly special. What? He's not doing anything in the NFL. He's just a guy. So I like the move for whoever Georgia has a quarterback next year. Adding a guy like Branch, I think, can have a lot of upside for the Bulldogs. Appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time. And until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.